So, good afternoon, Elaine. I'd like to thank you again for taking the time out of your day to do an interview with me.
Happy to do it.
As I mentioned before, this is an interview regarding your expertise in public relations. So, I know you have been in the public relations field for quite some time, and I was wondering if you could first start off by telling me what your definition of public relations is.
Sure. Public relations means a lot of different things, and there's many different expertise within the field of public relations. But largely, I would say that public relations is a communications discipline that essentially assists clients, corporations, businesses with strategically communicating a message either externally or internally.
Okay, and I know that you are currently the Director of Communications at Massachusetts Gaming Commission, and prior to that, you served as the Director of Communications and Media Relations for Boston Police Department. So with your work that you did with the BPD, you were also recognized as the In-House PR Team of the Year at the 2011 PR Week Awards. And could you describe to me the work you did while working with the BPD?
Sure. The Boston Police Department job is a very challenging one for a public relations practitioner. The role of the communications director runs the gamut from everything from responding to daily incidents involving public safety issues. They can be, some of them are routine, whether it's a missing persons report, a shooting incident, armed robbery, something along those lines, to something far more extraordinary of a public safety incident, such as something involving a mass situation. So it could be a quadruple homicide. It could be, I wasn't there for the Boston Marathon, but certainly something like the Boston Marathon bombing. And then also the other function of the Boston Police Communications spokesperson is to find unique ways to communicate to the public department programs. So, in other words, we launched the anonymous text-to-tip program, which was a really big public relations effort. One, to create awareness of the existence of the program. Two, to encourage members of the community to use it. So you might be doing that. Another really important piece for the Director of Communications is assisting the Commissioner of the Police Department to communicate important messages to the officers. So the Boston Police Department has approximately 2,200 police officers in 11 different districts spread out throughout the city. So it's very important to have an effective internal communications program to ensure that all of the officers get communicated to about whatever the issue might be, to set expectations, to keep them informed, and or to tell them great job about a particular incident. So the job of public relations for the police department is very challenging and requires a multitude of different job tasks.
Okay, and how would you compare what you did and the tasks that you had to accomplish with the BPD to what you currently do at the Massachusetts Gaming Commission?
Well, I would say that they are similar in terms of interest in news value. One of the things I haven't said yet, but it's really a key piece for public relations practitioners, is the ability to communicate with media. It's a critically important element of what most PR people do, particularly if you work in a function that has a high news value. So whether it be public safety, obviously, the daily news is comprised of crime and public safety information. 80% of its newscast. So there's obviously a high news interest there, media interest there. In the case of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, it was the first time that casinos were being introduced to the Commonwealth. So not only is there a high public interest, but there's also a very high news value. So therefore, lots of media calls on a daily basis. So in that regard, the job was similar, or is similar, I should say. The thing with the Massachusetts Gaming Commission is that you have less breaking news, as opposed to in a police department, you never know from day to day what's going to come up, because so much of it's actually breaking in nature. However, the Gaming Commission at times could be more challenging because it requires a lot more strategic thinking to communicate complicated messages to the public. So the good news is that at least you would have more time to contemplate and frame some of those things, which time wasn't really a luxury at the police department. So I would say that the scheduling-wise, they're a bit different. The Gaming Commission isn't 24/7 like the police department is. However, it's slightly more complicated in that because the subject matter is a bit more complicated, the strategy involved is more significant.
Okay, and I've also been wondering, since you guys work with casinos, what public relations specialization would that be put under? Like entertainment, etc., or is it its own?
It's actually political in nature, because it's actually right now. So in other words, maybe if you were working within the casino, you might consider that more sort of, entertainment type PR. But when you're on the regulatory side, which is what I do, the truth is that's actually more political in nature.
Okay. And so because you've been in the field for quite some time, how would you say that PR has changed or evolved, if at all?
I would say that it has changed significantly for many reasons in the last 20 years. The most obvious change would be the advent of social media. So when I started in this business back in 1998, and I'm embarrassed to admit that email was still a novelty. Cell phones were relatively new, which is embarrassing to admit. But and then I would say in around 2007, 2008, 2009. The nature of social media really started becoming a part of the conversation. And I think that actually the Boston Police Department, while I was there, we were the first police department, I believe, in the country to have a Twitter account.
Wow.
We were definitely the first police department in the country to have a blog. So the Boston Police Department actually has gotten a lot of credit for pioneering its use of social media, which has been a game changer in terms of how police departments communicate with communities, because you're not relying on the middleman, which is media. Which means, the message is filtered, which means, it doesn't necessarily get communicated in the way you hope that it would. So the ability to communicate directly with the masses has been tremendous. I would say for the police departments, but also even for any company, organization, government agency. So, whether you're selling sneakers for New Balance and you can reach the masses through Twitter, or you're a government agency and you have something that you want the public to know and you don't have to rely on the Boston Globe to do that, it's really phenomenal. But it means, that you have to know how to do it, and you have to be dedicated to it, and you have to do it well, because the better people got at it, the higher their expectations became. And back in 2007 and 2008, being on social media was a novelty. You were considered ahead of the game. And now if you're not, you're considered lacking. You're considered archaic.
Right.
And so now it's not an option. Once upon a time, you were considered advanced if you were doing it. So I would say that that's a major change. In just way, even since like I said, I got into this business in 1998, the other thing that has changed is the nature of the 24-hour news cycle. Once upon a time, deadlines meant something a little bit more than they do now, because now with, online and the way, the sort of dying breed of the daily newspaper and its hard copy. Now that they've largely published mostly online, there's this expectation of almost 24-hour availability if something's breaking or something like that. So, just in terms of how you have to deliver news and the expectation to be available to handle news has changed pretty dramatically in the last 20 years. And then the other thing I would say is because of media resources and things like that, once upon a time, like back in, 1999, if you had something that your client wanted to say or whatever, you could call a press conference,
right.
And say, put press conference up at the top of the press release, and all of a sudden everybody thought it meant it must be important. So people would show up. Nowadays, you just can't do that, you can't fake news, you can't, media is far too sophisticated for that. Their resources are far too limited to waste time on, dog and pony shows, which is what we used to call them back in the day. And things like that. You really don't have the luxury. You have to be more thoughtful and strategic than that now. So, there's just an overall evolving of public relations, and quite frankly, it's become a lot more sophisticated, if you ask me. And so in some regards, maybe it's easier because you have social media now, and in some regards, it's more difficult because you have social media now. So, but it's definitely evolved dramatically in 20 years.
So would you say that it's a lot more competitive now, or?
I would say that a good PR person has to know how to do more.
Okay.
So I would say that, just knowing how to write a press release isn't enough. Just having good contacts with media isn't enough. You have to understand the digital element of it now. You have to stay on top of social media trends. But by the way, I think one of the traps that maybe younger PR folks fall into is just knowing how to do social media and being up on Twitter isn't enough either. If you really want to be good at it, you still have to read the paper. You still have to familiarize yourself with bylines and know, a reporter's writing style and what they're interested in. And when a certain reporter calls you, you have to be able to assess, what's the story likely to look like based on the history of this reporter's style and subject matter focus. That's the way you can be useful to your clients. In other words, if a producer from the investigative team calls you, you certainly handle that call a lot differently than you would when the editor of the calendar listing section calls you. Mm-hmm. And you have to be able to bring value to your client, boss, customer, whatever the case may be, by being able to offer them that type of insight. So, in other words, just having a good handle on Twitter, I don't mean that like, having a good handle. I meant, I mean, just being very familiar with Twitter isn't enough. So the bottom line is good PR people have to be more well-rounded, even if you specialize in a certain something, and that's a good thing to do too. But you still have to have sort of a wide scope of understanding of all the different, methods of communication these days.
Right. So what you just said about basically knowing more than just how to handle Twitter and things like that seems to be more about people who are already in the field. So what advice would you give students who are trying to get into field on how they can stand out and look different compared to everyone else?
So it's never too early in the game to be familiarizing yourself with, like I said, whoever the local media, so make sure you're reading the newspaper, make sure you have a sense of all those things, get a sense of which reporters are on Twitter and what their style is and things like that. Another way that you can ingratiate yourself into the public relations community is to join things like PRSA, take part in whatever your local sort of public relations clubs and gatherings are. And then, again, depending upon what type of PR you want to go into, just really focusing on that, familiarizing yourself with it. So, obviously if it's sports media, just diving head first into that and, knowing your sports reporters and understanding how that coverage works and, maybe even thinking outside the box of things that, they're not doing that they could be doing differently and, being able to offer some of those suggestions, during an interview or something like that. If it's government PR that you're interested in, again, just sort of immersing yourself in it. And there really aren't any shortcuts. If it's really something that you want to do, and it's really something that you want to be good at, you have to immerse yourself in it.
And what advice would you give to students who aren't really sure what direction they want to go in terms of specialization in public relations?
So for me, I think in hindsight, one of the things that I think worked out really well is if you're not sure, if you want to go into public relations, but you're not quite sure what aspect of it will truly mobilize you, a good thing to do is try to get a foot in the door at a public relations agency that's of a decent size, that has a wide roster of clients, and that would provide you with an early opportunity, even through an internship or whatever the case may be, to be subjected to the different types of things that they do. I think oftentimes if you get yourself into the environment and you're able to observe a wide array of elements of PR, so, maybe you try your hand at writing a press release and you really enjoy the writing aspect of it. Or maybe you are at a PR firm that has, a wide range of clients. So whether it be sports, financial, healthcare, hospitality, any of those things. And then what that will do is, you'll sort of, most people, I think, start to identify, what mobilizes them, what interests them, what gets their adrenaline pumping when they work on something. And, for me, one of the things I figured out, I was kind of doing hospitality PR. I did some work for New Balance. I did some work for the Patriots. I did some work for a lot of restaurants and hotels. And for me, I started to notice that I was most engaged when something was going wrong. So whether a restaurant had a health code violation, or maybe a player on a sports team was arrested, or there was some like a problem. That's when it got my attention and when I seemed to be the most focused and when I was the most engaged. And come to find out, that meant that crisis communications was kind of my thing. I didn't know that at the time, but I certainly started to notice that I was kind of bored by routine press releases, and just, wanted to just get in there and get my arms around something that was going wrong.
Right.
And come to find out, that was a thing, which I didn't, when I first started, I didn't even know that. But it was a thing, and it's, crisis communications, and sure enough, that has turned out to be, what I gravitate to and try my best to excel at. The Boston Police Department certainly offered that to me on a daily basis, which was amazing. And then the Gaming Commission offers me that in the challenge of introducing casinos to a place that hasn't had them. And, the topic of casinos is so polarizing. Some people are just so anti-gaming. They think it's morally wrong. They think it's going to break down the fiber of the Commonwealth. Mm-hmm. And then there are others that say, this is amazing. We're going to have jobs. We're going to have revenue. We're going to have, so being the people who shepherd that in and try to do it right is a really hard thing to do. And so, so anyways, the element of sort of breaking news and crisis and everything is part of the Gaming Commission and was part of the police department. And it was certainly, like I said, for me, something that I just truly enjoy and where my heart is, when it comes to public relations.
All right. Well, I thank you so much. That takes care of everything that I need. Is there anything you would like to add or any questions for me?
The only thing I would add, if this is something that's for college age students and the possibility of going to PR, two things. I would say, one, it's a great job because it is so, because it can offer so many different things to so many different people. And so from that perspective, it really is a fun and interesting job. And it's a job that also, the salary range can be kind of significant, but there's money to be made. So, it's a good living, it's a good job, and it's a fun job, and so it's a great career option for people that are thinking about it. So I never wish I went into something else, and so I think that that's important. And the second thing that's important for college age folks thinking about going into public relations, here's a really important thing to think about. If you end up going like the spokesperson route, okay, which is ultimately what I ended up doing. Mm-hmm. Did I know I was going to do that? No, it just kind of happened. But spokespeople have a high profile, and so as a result of, you too are newsworthy. Mm. And I think that if you're contemplating being a spokesperson and think that one day, you'd have a public profile as a spokesperson, something that's really important starting at the college age is remembering that the internet is forever. You've got to be careful about what you put on Facebook pages. You've got to be careful about what you tweet. You have to be so careful about all that stuff because, like I said, in PR, you can have a high profile, and as a result of, you're newsworthy. And as a result of, if there's something undesirable on your Facebook page or something like that, you can end up embarrassed and publicly. So it's just really important to remember that a lot of people in public relations have public profiles.
Right.
So you have to. So you're not only trying to protect your client or your boss or whoever that is. You have to protect yourself too when you're in public relations. And I think that a lot of people don't always think that, and then they find out the hard way, when they get embarrassed in the newspaper about something that they put on Facebook.
Right. Especially with all the technology now, they can find things from however many years ago.
Yeah, and listen, I would be the first to admit that if Facebook was around when I was in college, I would be in big trouble. I would never have these jobs. Believe me, I'm so thankful that this stuff wasn't around. But at any rate, so I would just say that, like, you can never start too early, you know, reminding yourself that at some point you're going to be out in the professional world and stuff that's, you know, and even in college when you think it's Friday night and it's all in fun, it can come back to haunt you. So if you're serious about going into a professional career like PR, you have to stop being mindful about that kind of stuff at an early age.
Right. All right. Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
I really appreciated all of the insights that you gave me here for my interview.
Great. You're very welcome. So I hope you enjoy this beautiful weekend.
Oh, thank you. You too.
All right, Nikki, I'm so glad you called me. I'm sorry, I almost forgot for a second.
It's no problem. Thank you again.
All right, sweetie. I'll talk to you soon.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.